We'll get started in just a minute or two. We'll let folks come on in. Thanks for joining today. Excited to get to talk about this user survey. We'll get started in just a minute. Sweet. All right. I think we could probably get going. Thanks everybody for being here. We're super excited. My name is Matt Caponegro. I'm the chief of staff here at Testmo. I'm super excited to chat with you all about the results from our 2024 user survey, our inaugural user survey here at Testmo. Quick shout out to the almost 500 QAs, developers, team leads, engineering managers, folks who took the time to participate in our user survey last fall. It's been super helpful for us as we hit this next stage of growth as a company, and helping us think about how we want to continue to be able to serve y'all going forward. And also just provided a lot of insights that we're excited to share with y'all today as well. I'm joined today by our lead product manager, Simon Knight. If you were on our live stream back in December, you'll have heard from him before when we introduced our new automation launching feature. I'm excited to get to hear some of his takes and insight on the information that we're going to share with y'all today too. And then do keep in mind, stick around to the end. We will have a sneak peek Simon's going to share with us of the features and improvements that we're looking at for the next 12 or 18 months or so. And so stick around for that. That should be interesting. So we'll talk about a couple of housekeeping items before we get started with the main content. Then we'll jump into the takeaways and the meat of the stream today, and then we'll get a sneak peek at the end of that roadmap, like I talked about. I'm expecting that we'll go 45 minutes to an hour. So hopefully y'all are around. Get your coffee, get your tea, get some water, and we'll have a good time here for the next hour or so. One thing that we're going to try out today is a new way of doing some cool interactive, making this live stream a little bit more interactive. So we're going to try out a new tool. If you're down to try this out with us and give us some feedback, go over to slido.com. You can just enter in your browser and enter this code. Let's go back. And or if you have your phone, you can just take a picture, grab the QR code, and jump in that way. We'll take questions on the Slido, so you'll see a little Q&A tab that you can put your questions if you have any questions as we're going along. And there will be a couple points in the stream where we'll stop and actually ask for some input and reaction from y'all. So go ahead and get that open, have that open, and I'll call it out when we want your input later. But it should be fun, and excited to hear what y'all think about it. And without further ado, let's jump in to the top 10 takeaways from the inaugural Testmo user survey. Starting with number 10, development tooling. So one of the questions we asked users, just to try to get a sense of what tools are folks using for the development and QA these days, starting with what tools does your team use to track requirements? Not surprising to see Jira at the top of the list here. It's a very well-known tool, kind of the industry standard, although definitely a number of folks have been talking about moving away from Jira in the last couple of years as they've raised prices or just as it's gotten bigger. But not surprising to see that was definitely the winner in terms of tracking requirements, user stories, product specs, etc. Although a couple other newer tools to call out, GitHub issues and GitLab issues. They've invested a ton into those products. GitLab and GitLab have invested a lot more in those products the last couple of years. So I wouldn't be surprised if the percentage of folks using GitHub and GitLab issues respectively increases as those platforms just become more and more popular, not just for development management and CI/CD, but actual issue tracking. And then Linear is the other one I'd call out, which is interesting to see. They're a standalone platform for project management and product development. Interesting to see them coming in as the top kind of standalone dedicated tool for that. And similar trend, if we look at what folks are using to track issues, defects, bugs. Again, Jira takes the cake, followed by GitHub, GitLab, Azure DevOps, and again, Linear. So interesting to see that newcomer getting a decent amount of adoption. Last but not least, we asked folks what they use for CI/CD. Since using CI/CD and programmatic continuous integration development or deployment has become basically the industry standard, especially with the advent of cloud in the last 10, 15 years. Interesting to see almost a third of users said they're still using Jenkins, which was an early contender on the CI/CD scene, but closely followed by GitLab CI and GitHub Actions. Not as many folks using Azure DevOps, which I think doesn't surprise me a ton. The sense I get from the users that we've talked to is Azure DevOps tends to be more of like the enterprise platform. If your entire dev shop uses Azure, then you'll use Azure DevOps, but not usually something you choose otherwise. And then interesting to see Atlassian Bitbucket pipelines. That was something that Atlassian launched based off the Bamboo product that they used to have before. They basically retired Bamboo. It's only available for on-prem server, and even that is, I believe, end of support at some point in the next couple of years. But interesting to see Atlassian trying to keep up with the CI/CD game. They've got the corner on, they've got the issue tracking cornered, but curious to see if they'll be able to keep up with folks like GitLab, GitHub on some of the other development side. Simon, I'm curious, any insights from your perspective on the product side from any of this initial takeaways on the development tools?
Yeah, let me just say hello to everybody first, since I didn't really introduce myself earlier. So I'm Simon Knight. I'm the lead product manager for Testmo. So nice to be with you all today. Yeah, so I guess, in terms of my thoughts on some of these things, I mean, much like yourself, Matt, it's not surprising to me to see Jira at the top of the list on these slides as the kind of de facto industry leader for work management. And I guess, GitLab CI and GitHub Actions as well, as you said, lots of investment into those tools, lots of improvements over the last few years. Also, I guess somewhat reflective of our user base and the fact that, those three tools at the top of the list are the ones that we primarily support inside of Testmo. So I guess that has a part to play as well. I was interested to see some of the more sort of lo-fi approaches to requirements management in the list of requirements tracking tools. So Word, Google Documents, and email. And I guess, a lot of the C-suite and exec types still live in their email inboxes and communicate a lot of their business directives, which translate into requirements via email. So again, shouldn't come as too much of a surprise. And certainly, I imagine I have a number of requirements buried in my email inbox as well. Also, nice to see some honesty down the bottom of the list in terms of we don't have a formal way, or I'm not sure. I expect there's a lot of UX designs and requirements embedded into those things in tools like Figma, Miro, and maybe in on sticky notes on wall boards as well. So we all have lots of different ways and different places to track requirements, certainly. Um, and again, not particularly surprised to see Jenkins at the top of the list for CI/CD. Um, I guess the thing that occurs to me when I look at this is like, why is Jenkins still at the top of this list when GitLab and GitHub do the same thing as Jenkins, also for free if you don't want to pay for a license, and arguably better. And you don't have to host either of those things either. I mean, I get that there's cloud-based solutions for Jenkins as well these days, but I mean that just seems a much more sort of cumbersome approach than the GitHub or GitLab approach, where you're also storing probably your code as well, so you don't have to transport it from one place to another in order to kind of carry out your build pipeline. So I just question why Jenkins is still at the top of the list, really. And I guess one of the reasons why that intrigues me so much is because, as part of our roadmap for this year, we're probably going to end up looking at Jenkins integration in order to support our own sort of automation launching functionality. So, just a deep level of curiosity around why Jenkins is still so popular amongst its user base.
Thanks for that commentary, Simon. And yeah, to that point, if your team uses Jenkins and you're not planning to change, go ahead, put that in the chat. Be curious to hear what y'all end up saying about why your team is staying with Jenkins. I have some guess that it has to do with if it ain't broke, don't fix it, but curious to hear what y'all say. Let's jump into automation tooling. So for this one, get out that Slido, open up Slido in your browser. You go to slido.com, enter the code for our presentation here, 1267222. And we're going to try this poll out, or you can pull out your phone and answer the poll right from your phone. And let's see roughly what percentage of the testing are you aiming to handle with automated tests in 2025? So we'll give a couple minutes, I'll give a minute or so for folks to answer, and then we'll see what the results are. See a couple answers coming in. Folks are starting to figure it out. Awesome. And if you have any questions, we've got team members that are able to help out in the chat too. So just let us know. We'll give about 15 more seconds for everybody to vote. See if we can get a couple more votes in here. All right, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. All right, we'll call it. So the 17 folks who had time to answer, a couple of folks said, look, we're not going to be able to do any automation. Definitely a decent amount that are aiming for 30%, decent amount that are aiming for 50%. The highest percentage aiming for 80% automated, still getting some answers in. Nice. Definitely a decent spread, but definitely sounds like automation is one of the core focus areas for folks going into this next year. Well, if we look at how y'all answered today, definitely an emphasis on automate. I mean, I would say the majority of y'all said 50% or more. When we asked teams in 2024, at the end of 2024, how much they'd automated, you'll notice that that number skewed a lot lower. Obviously, this is context dependent, and we'll hear more from Simon on that in just a sec. But when we asked folks how much of their testing they'd automated so far, almost 85% of users said that they were using some automation, which is actually kind of interesting. 15% of folks saying there's just no automation they could be using at all. But then only a quarter of the users who responded to the survey said that they were 50% automated or more. So there's an interesting discrepancy there, like given the targets that folks just mentioned in the poll, and how much folks reported actually being able to have automated by the end of 2024. Simon, I'm curious if you have any commentary on that.
Um, yeah, I mean, I guess as you say, context is plays a big part here, right? I mean, and I guess like my response to this question is sort of heavily influenced by, I guess, coming from a kind of context driven background of like testing from the sort of context driven school of testing, if you like, where the important thing I think is for test and development teams is to have an appropriate level of automated test coverage for the context in which they're working, right? Which is obviously gonna depend somewhat on the industry that you're in, the project you're working on, the kind of software or product that you're testing, all of those kind of things. And I think your target for automated test coverage should be driven by how by the level of confidence that you need around your product, right? If you have enough automated testing coverage to be able to ship your product confidently at the end of a development cycle or iteration, then you're probably golden. So that for me is the key thing to be looking for here, not necessarily some like arguably arbitrary level of testing coverage. I think historically, what I've seen teams kind of aim for is around the 60% mark. And I think, that's like somewhat reflected in the survey results here. And in the responses we saw on the Slido. 80% is a great stretch goal to have, but again, it's all going to be like context dependent. And I mean, the other thing I would add is like when we talk about automated testing coverage, are we talking about unit tests? Are we talking about integration tests? Are you talking about, UI sort of Selenium tests? Are you talking about automation tooling supported testing where you're carrying out, for example, performance tests, which, require some level of tooling, but are then going to depend heavily upon some level of analysis of the results and sort of the engineering processes and things like that that need to be carried out as well. So I guess if I were to summarize my thoughts here is there's a lot of nuance and lots of things to kind of drill into in terms of what your automation approach is and what sort of targets you should be aiming for.
Yeah, to that point, this is sort of an unfair question because it's trying to abstract out an answer that is ultimately context dependent in a lot of different ways, but definitely have heard from users, and we'll talk about that in just a second. Folks are feeling a lot of pressure to automate for a number of reasons. And yeah, definitely, Corey, see what you mean about it being a dream to think that you might actually be able to get to a level of automation that actually opens up your time for the fun part of testing, the more creative part of testing.
Yeah. And
Um,
just to say, I mean, it may be an unfair question, but it's an important one to ask for us because it helps us sort of drive where and how we invest in the product, right? So this is like why we ask our users this question because we want to understand how they're likely to use Testmo both now and in the future.
Right. And also why we continue to invest in all of the parts of our product because you're not like almost no one said 100% automated testing. Yeah, that's something that we would care about a lot, bringing together manual test runs that you're going to need to run for more functional development, exploratory sessions for some of the more ad hoc kind of testing and automation. But nobody's automating everything away. And I think that's going to be even more true when we talk about the continued growth of the use of AI, which we're going to get to in just a second. But before we get there, just a quick note, looks like a wide range of tools that teams are using. One thing that's been interesting to me is to see the rise of Playwright over the last 5 years. Obviously, Selenium is still somewhat like the thing that first comes to mind when folks are thinking about automated test frameworks. But seeing Playwright actually, and if you go on Google and you're searching for top test automation frameworks, most of the articles you'll see will put Selenium at the top, whereas the users who responded to our survey, actually more of them are using Playwright. But no real surprises here. Playwright, Selenium, Cypress, Appium for mobile app testing, PyTest, Cucumber, a lot of the regulars that we're seeing here. So a big part of, I'm guessing a big part of the pressure on automation is the fact that most teams that we're talking to are using some form of agile. And we don't need to get all the way into the big A agile versus just the kind of agile principles today, but just interesting to note at least 75% of the users who responded to the Testmo user survey identified that their team uses agile. I think one person even said we use agile so extremely that it might not be good for us how agile we are. And then we've got another 10% that claimed they're identified as transitioning from waterfall to agile, which is then also related to increasing deployments. When we ask folks approximately how often does your org deploy new versions or updates, more than 50% said they deployed new updates at least once a week. Again, there was some context and nuance here. A number of folks mentioned that they're actually deploying to dev or test environments multiple times a day, even multiple times an hour, depending on new commits that are coming in or new changes. But maybe they're actually only deploying to production a couple days a week or weekly. But even just that, I mean, just shows how far the industry's come in terms of adopting the idea of ship fast, ship small, get stuff out to customers. At the same time, for QA, it makes things tricky though, because you have to figure out the right way to mitigate the risk of new changes that are coming in and be able to get enough testing done to prevent major issues slipping into production, but at the same time keep up with this pace of development. Simon, any commentary on this?
Yeah, I mean, no surprise again to see the majority of survey respondents seeing themselves as mostly or highly or even painfully agile in some cases. That's an interesting response there. I need to look that one up. I think we're obviously happy that Testmo enables a high level of business agility and helps teams to ship quality code more frequently than might otherwise be the case. So we'll claim that one as a win. Um, I mean, I guess to your point about Big A and Big A Agile, there's been some level of chatter, on the socials and on the interwebs around how effective Agile is proving to be as a development methodology, like at scale or as teams are increasingly sort of maturing and adopting sort of DevOps principles and things like that. I mean, I I can't predict the future, but my guess is that teams are going to continue to use parts of agile or scrum that work for them, and probably abandon stuff that maybe doesn't work quite so well in their specific context. And over time, we'll see how that plays out and possibly see some other more sort of hybrid approaches win out as the tech sort of landscape evolves. And it's not difficult to imagine that AI will, ultimately play some part in what that all looks like as it continues to sort of drive change and innovation in the development and DevOps space. And it seems to me inevitably in the methodologies that are being applied as well. So I think we've got a bunch of AI survey responses to dig into next, actually.
Absolutely. To that point, I mean, this has been one of the biggest areas of that's changed development and QA in the last couple of years, especially with the way that the LLMs like ChatGPT and Bard, now Gemini and Claude, the advances that they made in 2024. When we asked folks if they had already started to adopt AI in the fall of 2024, nearly 25% of folks said they had. Now that means there's still about 75% that either hadn't or weren't really sure, which is interesting. Seeing just how far that the adoption has come already. And of the folks that answered that they had adopted, not too many surprises here, I don't think. A lot of folks mentioning using ChatGPT or coding assistants, GitHub Copilot, Microsoft or Azure Copilot, assistants, code assistants or plugins with Postman, Selenium, etc. A lot less adoption of bespoke AI tools like Applitools or Catalan Studio or Functionize, these proprietary AI enabled tools. Definitely seems like folks were starting with the kind of ALM or LLM, sorry, LLMs or code assistants that are built into products they're already using. So with that, again, we want to hear from you. For the folks that are on the call, have you or your team started to use AI in your day-to-day work? And in particular, what have you found to be valuable? Have you found a way to actually use it that provides value, or is it more of like a novelty thing? What about AI has actually generated the biggest impact for your team so far? So again, we'll leave a minute or two for folks to start answering, and then we'll see what folks say. Definitely a longer answer, so expecting folks to take a couple minutes to answer. Mostly use it to generate real-life data. Devs are starting to use it for unit testing. Okay. Taking notes, not even in coding, but just to make some of those mundane managerial tasks easier. Tool to kickstart ideas, refine. We'll give about 15 more seconds. All right. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Awesome. Thanks for the quick thoughts, y'all. Yeah, I definitely see what you mean. Um, Using AI, but not necessarily as a team, and really for starting to make the other kind of non-testing related tasks a little bit easier, or to get inspired, sometimes some code snippets. I'm curious, Simon, if you have any reaction. I know you've been using AI a little bit more in the work that you've been doing too. Any reactions to this?
Um, yeah, I mean, I think my sense around how AI is currently being used, um, again, is that there's like a lot of nuance that isn't perhaps well captured in the survey, the sort of aggregated responses from the survey. I mean, certainly my own experience of using AI for the various tasks um, that I use it for, and I mean, some of those tasks are sort of product management related. Some of them are testing related because I get involved in aspects of testing as a product manager as well. And you know, I when I'm using a tool like ChatGPT or Claude or even Copilot, my my approach tends to go through a process of, you know, brainstorming. I think a couple of folk mentioned here, and you know, using it to generate ideas, which I can then sort of riff off to some extent. I go through a process of, you know, making a request, analyzing the response, thinking about it a little bit, and then kind of refining my original request a little bit further based on that response. So, you know, I see AI as being like a partner rather than a simple tool that I can use to generate some response that's going to be right first time. And what that implies for me is that AI is not quite at the place yet where we would be able to use it to just generate a bunch of test cases based on some list of requirements, right? The response that I'm going to get at first blush probably isn't going to be good enough for me to rely on, certainly as a product manager, and probably not as a tester or a test manager either. And I think the same thing applies for like the design of unit or otherwise automated tests as well. My experiences of using Copilot are that, you know, the first response, the first thing it suggests probably isn't going to be the best response. And if it generates, you know, some code, I'm probably going to have to refine that code to some extent. And I may actually need to like think through the problem a little more broadly than my original sort of request. Um, would have like provided to the AI. So you know, I've got to give it like the level of context that it needs to be able to provide me useful a useful response. I mean, the old adage, garbage in, garbage out applies, right? You're only going to get as good of a response from it as you supply information to it in the first place. So again, I think lots of nuance in terms of how AI is being used now, and how it will be used in the future. That, you know, we're going to need to like dig into both as an industry, and also from like a Testmo perspective in terms of how we ultimately seek to utilize AI to support um, users in the Testmo product itself.
Right. And where that value add comes in, like one of you had suggested, are we looking at using a test plan to help generate test case or a better organized test repository? That those are great ideas. Definitely think that we've been thinking about. But then also, like a lot of you have said, using as a boilerplate or to help generate test data. A lot of these related more to um, code snippets and things like that that you might be using in a IDE as you're writing your automated test. So this is definitely something that we've been talking about a lot and are very interested in. And a lot of the use cases that y'all talked about here seem to be pretty well reflected in the responses that we got from users in the survey last fall. Some folks talked about actually being able to generate test automation scripts. Um, but a lot of folks were talking about trying to just get started on a writing test cases or scenarios, like a number of you mentioned, or generating test data. That's definitely something that we've seen. And to your point, with a lot of folks talking about the application for drafting unit tests or debugging unit tests, that kind of thing. Um, Seems like there's a lot of use cases that folks are already finding to speed up the stuff that's wasting time and then enable you to focus on more value add activities. For the folks who hadn't said that they had adopted AI, it seemed like the desired use cases pretty much line up. Like same kind of thing. Folks are looking for support, just getting started, getting that first draft going, or getting that brainstorm for drafting test cases, help generating automation scripts. Obviously, we talked earlier about the pressure on I'm looking to automate more. So if you could have something else get you halfway there, even 30% of the way there, that's a start. And also generating test data, which leads into uh, takeaway number 5, challenges with adoption of AI. For the folks that had already adopted AI, clearly the biggest challenge or concern that they raised was data privacy and security concerns, which I mentioned as being following closely on what we were just talking about. Because when you're talking about trying to generate test data, or when you're talking about being able to um, generate reliable test cases based on your code, you want to be careful about what you're actually providing to these systems to be able to generate that. And I see in the comments, Manish 2359 mentioned that your team's actually using a custom model to be able to generate test cases. That seems like one of the obvious ways that you could start to get around some of the data privacy concerns if you've got a a way that you're hosting that model that is not shared back with the kind of general wider LLMs. Um, but yeah, definitely something that teams have been thinking about. And then I'm imagining the second challenge will probably decrease as the adoption of AI tools becomes more and more widespread. But definitely seems like teams are still trying to figure out like, how can I use this in a way that's actually going to benefit me? One of you mentioned sometimes it feels like anything more than just a quick back and forth, I end up having to refine the prompt so much that it ends up wasting more time. And I think that's definitely something that we'll keep an eye on over the next year or two and see in what ways can these tools be made more useful more quickly. Um, Simon, any thoughts there before we go on to takeaway number 4?
Yeah, I mean, cost, data privacy, obviously going to be considerations. Again, I think questions around what's truly valuable in my context, what tooling integrations are going to help me realize that value for my team. Questions around making it like a repeatable, reliable process as well. So, if you're going to utilize AI, how do you sort of democratize that across the whole team and turn it into like something that's sort of systemic and has a good repeatable process around it. Um, yeah, not too much to add here though.
When we for takeaway number 4, when we asked about the top challenges that teams faced in 2024 around testing and QA, adoption of AI was not in the top 5 at all. You can see coming in here, keeping up with changes in the industry, new tools and methodologies slash AI, only 11% of folks said that this was a top challenge for them. So to that point, it seems like there's definitely some value that's coming from AI, but we'll continue to see if that increases as models and the applications get more context specific. By and far, what teams said was they were trying to figure out how they could automate more of their testing. And in sort of conversely, not having enough time to do everything that teams were asking them to do from a QA or testing perspective, in part because teams didn't get funding to have enough other team members that are actually dedicated to QA. A lot of these are issues that we've heard our teams and folks in the industry complain about for a while. It's just the general sense that QA is not getting enough funding, especially for the level of importance that teams put on QA to deliver on the promise that companies make to our users, right? Like QA is that last line of defense that's actually bridging between the ideas that are being developed on the company side and what value that actually delivers to users. And getting short shrifted in terms of time or team members is not new, but interesting to see those top challenges coming up in 2024 still. Simon, you've been in industry for a little while. Any commentary on seeing these top 3 or 5 challenges here?
They seem like perennial challenges, stuff that certainly I've seen before, experienced firsthand. Hear lots of folk, talking about at conferences and things like that. I mean, these are age-old testing challenges. I think, I'd maybe speak to some of the ways that Testmo hopefully supports you with some of those challenges. So, we make it really easy to integrate Testmo with your automated tests in the first place, kind of streamline the process of pushing results from those tests into Testmo so that you can, surface insights and share your testing outcomes with people who care about those things, your stakeholders. How you can use Testmo to cover potential gaps in your automated test approach with exploratory sessions, for example. So that's something that I frequently use Testmo for. I look at the test automation coverage and think about areas where, maybe we don't have quite so good automation, and seek to cover those things with exploratory sessions, which Testmo is great for. So yeah, hopefully some of you all are benefiting from the new automation launching functionality as well, helping to integrate with CI/CD workflows a little more easily. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the challenges here that aren't directly addressed by Testmo seem somewhat perennial to me. So yeah.
And they are directly related to what we saw when we asked teams about their top 3 objectives. Again, I mean, dealing with that challenge of automating more tests, most folks, the majority of folks said that automating more tests was one of their core objectives. And I can't help but think that that's related to the second highest objective that we heard teams talk about, which is just generally how can we increase our test coverage? How can we mitigate the risk, decrease the risk that we might have of not having tested something that's part of the application going out to customers? But at the same time, with that pressure to release multiple times a day or at least weekly, making testing more efficient and building better processes around QA was also important. I was glad to see that it's that folks are focusing not just on the automation or tooling side, but are really keenly aware of the fact that process improvement is as important as anything else. And to that end, want to take one last opportunity to get y'all's feedback. This has been super fun. I appreciate everything that y'all have shared so far. We have one last poll that we want to try. So thinking about these objectives, and if you think about then going into 2025, what are your team's core objectives? In a few words, a word, you can put a couple different ones. Go over to the Slido again, slido.com, code 1267222, and let's see what people start to say. What are your team's top objectives around QA and testing in 2025? Again, we'll give a minute or two, and then we will get to our last two takeaways and our roadmap sneak peek. Give about 30 more seconds for folks to toss in their answers here. Definitely seeing automated coverage, improving test coverage for mobile application your team's working on. Trying to figure out how to reduce overall testing time. Even getting started with automation or improving automation. Nice. All right, 15 seconds. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Getting those last answers. Nice. Okay. Yeah, I appreciate hearing from y'all. A lot of similar objectives heading into 2025. Reducing automation, flaky automation, increasing automation coverage, so that you can spend more time on the more human-centered, more human valuable tasks. I appreciate this last one too, getting clarity on requirements, not just focusing on testing, but how can we improve the QA process by being really clear about what the requirements were in the first place. Awesome. Thanks for trying that out with us. All right, last but not least, our top two takeaways from the user survey. First, we asked Testmo users. Many of you, I believe, are already Testmo users also, so you may have been a participant in answering this question. But we asked folks what their favorite part of Testmo was, and heard a lot of things that were great to hear, really useful to see the different ways that like what we've built already is already assisting folks. A lot of folks talked about the speed of the platform itself, which I was really glad to hear about, because that's something that our engineering team is really focused on from the beginning, from the inception of Testmo, is making it really fast, so that you can be as efficient when you're in the middle of testing as possible, making it easy to use and even beautiful. I'm so glad somebody had captured that, because that's something that we aim for. And a lot of folks also talked about the automation integrations being really helpful, given especially all the pressure we've seen on automation integrations. Folks talked about how flexible the platform is in terms of customizing the test cases, test case templates, tailor workflows. A lot of folks really appreciating what we've already done so far with integrations, and even a number of folks talking about how they really appreciate the reporting that we've built in to Testmo already, the clarity, the ease of use, the like the real-time graphical summary. I was surprised to see this, because then when we get to our number one takeaway from the Testmo user survey, this is the stuff that we love to see. Where can we improve and make this platform even better for you? The number one area that folks talked about being their least favorite was reporting. Limited customizations, looking for better reporting around automation, more clear reporting on from this overall, like the overarching perspective, like especially using a feature, for example, like milestones. Folks looking for more capability around our API, not just around reporting, which was one of the areas, but also expanding some of the features and functionality there for doing things like test case milestone management, uploading video evidence, and then also just a number of folks who were looking for us to make improvements on things that we have offered to make things that much easier for you. So with that, I'm actually going to pass the mic to Simon. Thankfully, a lot of the things that y'all mentioned as things that you were frustrated with Testmo or wanted to see improvements are things that we've been thinking about too. Simon, you want to give us a quick sneak peek of our what we're working on in the next 12 to 18 months?
I surely am, Matt. Thank you. I'm going to try and keep this relatively fast-paced since we're starting to run a little bit short on time. So coming soon, we are working on new API endpoints right now. So we're currently building out what we expect will be the first in a series of API endpoints, which are mainly geared towards a couple of objectives. So we want to provide additional ways to get at more detail around your test results. And we also want to provide you ultimately with more ways to manage your test cases via the API. So on this slide, the first endpoint we expect to release is like a get runs results endpoint. So Testmo users can already get high-level statistics from some of the existing endpoints for runs, automation runs and sessions using endpoints like the get runs run ID or get automation runs automation run ID. And that will provide you with like a status count breakdown for the running question, for example. But we've also heard from a number of customers that you'd like access to more detailed information. So that's what we're going to try and provide you with. So this endpoint will hopefully, will provide you with the tests and their results for a specific run. And it's going to allow you to specify some additional parameters, limiting those results to like a date range, or whether you want the latest results for your test run or all of the results. And you'll be able to apply various other constraints that are broadly consistent, I'd say, with our existing endpoints. So that's what we're seeking to do with this initial endpoint. We expect to build more API endpoints, as I've already mentioned. We're releasing this one first so that we can kind of get into a regular cadence of shipping some of the smaller projects that we're working on more frequently, and also so that we can get feedback from you as soon as possible. So we understand, so we're getting like a better understanding from you as to whether and what improvements are needed to subsequent endpoints that we release in the future. So that's something that we're working on right now. Next slide, please, Matt. We are also very excited to be working on an initial implementation of a reporting center in Testmo. So this will be one of our flagship features, I'd say, for Testmo this year. It's already in development. It's planned for release sometime during the next quarter, I would say, hopefully fairly early in that quarter, but I'm going to like caveat that with just next quarter, just in case things don't go exactly according to plan. It's going to look something like the image that you see on the right, and will probably be limited to 1 or 2 reports in the initial release. Again, with a view towards shipping things quickly getting feedback from you guys early so that we can make sure we're, adjusting accordingly. Matt, if you can go to the next slide. So as I said, we're seeking to release a couple of reports in the initial iteration. So first up will be the coverage and traceability report, seeking to answer the question of, do tests cover cover our requirements? Where those requirements have been linked to specific cases, runs, or exploratory sessions using your issue tracking integrations. So when using this report, once you've identified which requirements you want to report on, you'll be able to further sort of narrow down the report based on the configuration settings that you can kind of see on the side there in the mock-up. So, based on what milestones you want to include, for example, as well as the application of filters based on specific runs or sessions, and potentially constraining the report to a specific time frame as well. As you can also see in the image, for the reports generally, you'll be able to make refinements in terms of what content you want to display in the report, in much the same way as you can do currently when you're creating PDF reports for your test runs, for example. So on the right is a mock-up for a milestone report. So one of the limitations, I think, in terms of the existing reporting in Testmo is that you can't easily report on everything that you tested and what the results of your testing were for an entire milestone. So that's something we're going to be seeking to address with this report. It's going to answer the question of what testing was done for my milestone, which may be a sprint or an iteration or a release. And what were the results for all of my tests that I want to include in the scope of this report for my milestone that I'm interested in. So again, using the configuration settings on the left-hand side, you'll be able to apply filters and constraints to that report as well. So hopefully you all are excited about that. I know I am, and like I say, that is coming very soon. Next slide, Matt. So in terms of other plans for what's coming, slightly later down the pipeline, as I already mentioned, we've got more API endpoints that we plan on developing. So case creation and management endpoints to make it easier to generally manage or make changes to your test cases via the API, including the creation of new ones. And additional endpoints is needed to provide better access to results and result metrics. We've also got more reports planned, mainly focused on improving test automation reporting and workload management at present. We have more integrations planned. Jenkins, by popular request. No doubt many of you on this live stream will be pleased to hear. With a view towards sort of rounding out the automation launching feature, as I mentioned earlier. So yeah, we're seeing the need for that and expecting to address it soon. Based on user feedback, we are also planning on implementing improved and expanded event notifications. So specific use cases for that are, maybe when you're making changes to test cases, or when comments are added, or maybe when somebody is tagged in the context of a test result or a comment. We're expecting to improve notifications and alerts around those things. So just generally sort of improving the workflow aspect of test case creation and updating and test results and commenting and all of those kind of things. We're also expecting to address some of the common areas of feedback we get in terms of the UX. We know that it's generally an area where we get really good feedback. about Testmo. You like how Testmo looks and you like how it behaves in terms of the UI and the user experience generally. But we also know there are some areas that need a little bit of improvement. So how, for example, repository folders are navigated is one specific area that we've got targeted, but we'll be, digging into your feedback for other areas as well. And on the AI front, finally, we have ideas for how we may incorporate AI features into Testmo. We're currently exploring those things. As I mentioned during the live stream, I'm deeply interested in what the interactions with AI really look like, and how best to incorporate those into Testmo in a way that genuinely adds value and isn't kind of gimmicky. So we're definitely looking into how to do that, with more information to follow once we've sort of landed on some decisions in that area. Maybe in our next live stream we'll have some more to report. So stay tuned for that. And just to say, all of the items on this slide, they're currently being discussed. Nothing's like finalized yet. It's all subject to potential change. But we are very open to hearing your feedback about all of it. And with that, back to you, Matt.
Awesome. Went just a few minutes over here, but that's because there was a lot of good stuff to cover in the live stream today. Really appreciate y'all being here with us, taking the time out of your day to learn with us and share your insights as well. And if you can, if you're still around, if you can, we'd love to hear in the comments or in the Q&A and the Slido, whatever is up for you, just what you thought. You want to see more of this? Are there any particular topics? Did you like the Slido? If you could leave a couple comments before you leave, that'd be great. But otherwise, hope you have a wonderful rest of your day, wherever you're calling from, whether it's have a good night, good rest of your day together, and we'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks so much, everybody.
Goodbye from me too.